thought back to actually it was a revival I went to when I was in high school. And who knows where the word worship comes from? Excellent, you get to learn something. The word itself, should I talk in that? So the word itself, worship, actually comes from the word worthship, as in, being worth something. And the idea behind worship is it's an expression of recognizing the worth of something else. I always find this really interesting in music because, when you're playing something like this, I was watching a documentary on film music over the weekend, and do you guys know Moby? Is he still at all popular? No. Okay. Electronic pop guy from the late 90s. But Moby was talking about how, music is nothing but just like, air molecules kind of wiggling in your ears. And one of the interesting things is that, when you play an instrument or when you sing, what you're basically doing is just getting those air molecules to kind of wiggle in a certain way. And so when I'm playing something, when we're listening to music, we all kind of have this shared experience. I was kind of reminded of what a month or so ago when we had that eclipse. I remember driving through it, and it really had this sort of interesting way of bringing a lot of people together because suddenly, everybody pretty much across the country had darkness in the middle of the day for a while. And it was kind of interesting to me. I happened to be driving to Missouri to visit family at the time, and the roads were just lined with all kinds of random people staring up. And it was like on a Monday. You don't usually see people on the side of the road staring up, hanging out in the middle of the day on a Monday. But here they were. They had this shared experience of this eclipse, and they all got to see it. I always think of that, I thought about that, as I was driving with music, because we have this experience where we all listen to the same thing, and we all kind of tune into each other and tune into sort of the reason why we're here. When I think about worship and showing worth to God, one of the composers that I always think of is Bach. He's, kind of a big name, and Bach had kind of this interesting habit. And I don't know how, this gets kind of nerdy back in music history, but, back in the 15th and 16th centuries, composers didn't sign their work. Artists didn't sign their work. And it's because they believed their work simply to be a revelation of things that God had already sort of presented to the world. And Bach was no exception. He never signed his own work. Instead, at the end, he would write 3 letters, SDG, which stood for Soli Deo Gloria, to God alone the glory. And I think in Bach's case, he really did believe that everything that he was doing was simply the result of tuning in to what the Lord had presented him, both in terms of his talent and the art that exists in the day. I thought I'd play a little bit of Bach today. This is a toccata that he wrote. And one of the interesting things about Bach's music is that it's very intricate and it seems bound by a lot of rules. And one of the things that is interesting about music is that it tends to be incredibly honest. So if you have, notes, there are a lot of combinations of notes that don't sound good. I mean, the chances of me randomly hitting something that sounds good is pretty low. So it takes a little bit of work to get things to sound right. And Bach really had a way of doing that. So I'm going to play this thing. It's in 3 parts. The first part is a toccata, which is just to sort of, warm the fingers up and test out the instrument. The second part is slower and is meant to emulate the voices of a choir. And then the third part is a fugue. And what you'll hear is this melody. that's pretty much it. He takes that melody, he plays it in different keys at different times in 3 voices that are managed with 2 hands. It's a little bit of a trick to pull off. It took me a while to learn it, but I hope you like it. We'll check it out. fascinating. He wrote his music for so many different reasons, and he kind of embodies this idea of worship for me. The music that Bach wrote has a lot of things like this, which is kind of a celebration of all of the sounds and things that have been made available to us. He also wrote a variety of passions. He wrote 4 settings of the Passion story, and it's one of these things where he wanted people to really understand the stories, and so he set them to music. In that way, you know, he ends up being a little bit the godfather of musical theater, a way to tell a story and make sure that it really hits and that you can really kind of understand the details of what's going on in that. He also wrote music for Sunday services. It's pretty impressive. He wrote I want to say he wrote about 300 entire services, each about 20 or 30 minutes of music. It's always been, you know, just kind of impressive and inspiring to me. I don't really get a chance to play as much of it as I used to. It was kind of one of my favorite things at the beginning when I started studying. I know we have just a few minutes left, but I'd be happy to entertain questions. Do you guys have any questions about me, or music, or stuff? I will answer as best I can. Yeah, Tony.
Can you tell us what you do when you're not here?
So when I'm not here, I am either teaching back at my house. I live in Iowa City. And then I also try to do, my sort of hobby job is musical theater nerd. So I'll be playing for King and I when it comes to Hampshire next month, and we're going to do a sort of a theater Christmas thing in December. And then last summer I did Little Mermaid. So that's kind of my other fun thing. And again, theater is one of those things that I really sort of like doing for the same reason. Again, showing, you know, sort of worth in other people and situations that we have. I think it's just kind of amazing that I can play like 2 chords, and I bet a lot of you will just like instantly, you know. You might have it there. You definitely have it there. Like, it just doesn't take that much, you know? Or one note. You know, this is one note. And that's really all it takes. But that again kind of speaks to the power of music, is that you just have these things that instantly kind of come up. And I think it's fantastic. Every time I've worked on a theater show, well, I'll put it this way, one of the greatest joys of my life being a musician is that I feel like I can walk in almost anywhere. I grew up in an Episcopal church, which is a little bit, it's a little bit different than, I don't know if you guys have been to an Episcopal church before. It's kind of like Catholic light is what they call it. But the idea is, like, I grew up there, and then I got asked to play for a Methodist church and walked in and could just do it. A couple years later, I get asked to play in a praise and worship band down in Texas at a Baptist church. And I just walked in and fit right in. And it was a great thing to be able to just sit down and do, you know, make music and have this experience with everybody else. Same thing in theater. Like I said, I'm going to be playing King and I next month with Hampshire. It's a touring show. It comes in from out of town. It's going to be with a whole bunch of people I don't know. And that doesn't matter, because we're all there for the same thing. We're there to make music, and so we're going to sit down and play the show, and everybody's going to have a great time. So it really is a powerful way to bridge gaps and bring people together. That's a long answer to that question. Oh wow, so my story is I started when I was 7, and then I quit when I was 9, and then I started when I was 11 and quit when I was like 11 and a half. I didn't like that guy. And then I started again when I was 14, and then I got recruited to play in jazz band and marching band. And then my teacher quit. I don't think it was because of me. And then, I was telling somebody the other day, I actually I went to school as a chemistry major and a religious studies minor, and then found myself spending all my time in the music building, mostly because the chemistry building smelled funny and the music people were just like way fun. And then it just kind of stuck. Did that. So yeah. We're good? You have to go learn. Thank you for coming. Thanks for being a great audience.